Edith Stein, or Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, is one of the great thinkers and saints of the 20th century. She was a woman who reached the pinnacle in many ways. As a woman, she fought for women's dignity at a time when they weren't even allowed to vote. As an intellectual, she was ahead of her time, making valuable contributions to philosophy and education. And as a Catholic, she was ultimately recognized as a martyr and a saint. Who is this woman who earned the admiration of the intellectuals of her time and whose anthropological insights continue to illuminate today's major debates? Join us as we explore the places that shaped the life of this remarkable philosopher, saint, and co-patroness of Europe. We are in Germany, the country where Edith Stein lived. As one of the most remarkable women of the 20th century, her message is more relevant today than ever. As a thinker and a questioner, she fought for women's rights, and as a philosopher, she pursued the truth relentlessly until she found it. As a saint of our time, and through her example of life and depth of thought, she challenges us to rise above mediocrity and aspire to the highest peaks of the spirit. A spectacular monument in Cologne's Borsenplatz encapsulates the life of this multifaceted woman, who converted from Judaism to Christianity, who was a victim of discrimination, first for being a woman and later for being Jewish, and who died as a martyr in the Auschwitz concentration camp, embracing children and comforting their mothers. As we examine this memorial in detail, the Star of David, the Bible, the face divided in two, and a large pile of shoes, we find they are powerful symbols that give us an initial impetus and set us on our journey to follow in the footsteps of Edith Stein. Edith Stein was born on October 12, 1891, into a Jewish family as the youngest of 11 siblings. The fact that she came into the world on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, had a profound impact on her, as it is one of the most important and sacred holidays in the Jewish community. For her mother, a devout Jewish woman, the birth of her youngest daughter on the Day of Forgiveness was a sign from God and led her to have a special fondness for Edith and always to believe that she was destined for something great. We arrive in the city of Breslau, which became part of Poland after World War II and is now known as Wrocław. Situated on the banks of the Oder River and home to just over 630,000 inhabitants, it is a beautiful city known for its market square, surrounded by elegant townhouses, restaurants, fountains, and its famous gnomes, which are a favorite photo spot for tourists and children alike. Our first stop is the Edith Stein House Museum, where she lived from 1910 to 1933. Located at 38 Nowowieska Street, we are welcomed by the museum's director, Marek Zaleski. who takes us on a tour through the rooms of what was once the Stein family residence. At the entrance, we find the family's genealogical tree and an exhibition of old photographs showing what the city looked like before it was bombed during World War II. As we walk through the house, we see numerous paintings, period furniture, and books, as well as photographs depicting different stages of Edith's life and portraits of some family members. The grand living room particularly stands out, a space where the family would gather to celebrate anniversaries, important dates such as birthdays, and even weddings.
Edith believed she had received the greatest gift by being born on the day of reconciliation, because her mother was a devout Jewish woman. Here, we can see an example of how the table was set, and food was prepared for the Sabbath celebration on Saturday. Here, for example, this prayer book for German Jewish women is particularly interesting. Everything is written in German. Her mother knew the Hebrew language, but she didn't speak it very well. They would pray on Friday evenings, and she wanted to pass on their father's faith to her children. But as her children grew older, they gradually abandoned their father's faith.
Marek Zaleski shows us the only existing photograph of the family. He explains that while it is a well-done family portrait, it is actually a photo montage. The father's face was taken from an old passport photo because by the time Edith was the age she appears in the picture, her father had already passed away. Siegfried Stein was a timber merchant who died before Edith turned 2. Her mother, Auguste, took charge of the family and successfully ran the lumber business she inherited from her husband, earning the admiration of those around her, especially her youngest daughter, who was affectionately known in the family as Clever Edith, for her intelligence and creativity. Recognizing the enormous role her mother played in Edith's life, we decided to visit her final resting place in the cemetery. Following Jewish tradition, we noticed the stones placed on her tombstone, symbolizing the permanence of her legacy.
I have recounted that I was in my mother's arms when my father said goodbye to us before leaving on that journey from which he would never return. Even in that last moment, I called out to him as he turned back to look at us before departing. Because of this, I became for my mother the last legacy of my father. I slept in the same room as her, and when she returned home at night exhausted from the store, her first visit was always to me. When I was sick, she wouldn't even take off her coat, and she would sit at the edge of my bed and have her simple dinner brought to her there.
A lover of freedom, Mrs. Stein never forced her daughters to practice their faith. As time passed by, upon entering adolescence, Edith gradually drifted away from the religion she had inherited from her parents. She stopped praying and later declared herself an atheist.
We could say that she was always searching for the truth. In fact, she grew up in a Jewish family. Her mother was a devout Jew who went to the synagogue every Saturday. But when Edith was 14, she began to reflect. She was very thoughtful and profound and said, "I cannot pray if I am not convinced that God exists." So she voluntarily stopped praying. It might seem like she distanced herself from faith, but in reality, she was always driven by that search for truth. Even this stance is about seeking the truth. This pursuit later led her to study philosophy as a way to seek deeper understanding.
After studying psychology and German studies at the University of Breslau, Edith became interested in the ideas of Edmund Husserl, the leading figure in phenomenology at the time, and chose to study philosophy. Her intellectual talent quickly earned her a position as his assistant, placing her within Husserl's inner circle alongside renowned philosophers such as Max Scheler, Adolf Reinach, Hans Lips, and the Polish thinker Roman Ingarden. Through phenomenology, Edith Stein sought to find answers to her questions about truth and the deeper meaning of things. But this search, unable to find answers even in books, led her to experience profound existential crises.
This struggle for clarity took place within me amid a great torment. I had no peace, neither by day nor by night. I went through a long period of insomnia, and many years would pass before I could once again have a restful night. Each day, I sank into utter despair. For the first time in my life, I was faced with something I could not achieve through sheer willpower. And when I went on excursions, I would hope to fall off a cliff and not survive the accident. No one had the slightest suspicion of what was happening inside of me.
When World War I broke out, driven by her strong patriotic spirit, Edith felt she could not simply focus on her own affairs and put her studies on hold to volunteer with the Red Cross, caring for patients with infectious diseases. Later, she felt it was time to resume her philosophy studies, believing that she could contribute to the development and service of others. Following in Edith Stein's footsteps, we arrive in the city of Freiburg, where as a young university student, she earned her doctorate in philosophy, with her dissertation on the problem of empathy receiving the highest honors. Alongside philosopher Cecilia Giudice, we explore the courtyards and library of this prestigious university. Founded in 1457, making it the fifth oldest university in Germany, and a place where 21 Nobel laureates have studied. One of the halls bears Edith Stein's name, and among the thousands of volumes in the library, we find her doctoral dissertation, The Problem with Empathy, for which she received the highest academic distinction, summa cum laude.
I believe one of the key ideas she emphasizes is the wholeness of the human person. And by wholeness, I mean, for Edith Stein, a human being is a whole who thinks, feels, wills, and acts. There, she is acknowledging the intellect, she is acknowledging the ability to understand things, the feelings, the emotions, the depth of human interiority. For Edith Stein, this is essential, and integrating it is only natural. And then there's the will, the part of us that, after inner reflection and decision-making, ultimately moves us to act. I think it's crucial to note that throughout all her writings and even in her life, she embodies this truth of the human being as a whole.
But we don't see this idea of a person as a whole who incorporates everything. There's often a dichotomy, a disconnect between what we think and how we act.
That's right. And that is precisely Edith Stein's contribution, because between what we think and what we do, often in philosophy or in the history of philosophy, the focus is placed on these two poles. And it is said, asserted, or assumed that we do is a consequence of what we think. Yet in reality, that's not the case, as you roughly pointed out. What Edith Stein adds to this discussion is the understanding that between what our intellect knows and what our will chooses to act upon, because we act through our will, lies our inner world of feelings and emotions. We're human beings where each of us make our evaluations. All of this, she actually gives this dimension a specific name in German, das Gemüt. There isn't a direct translation in English, but it refers to the heart, the affective core, the very center of the soul, the deepest center of the soul, the deepest interior space where human beings make their decisions and where they weigh what is truly important. That this is the right thing to do, but we don't feel it that way, right? Or we see that this would be what is right. We understand that it would be the best, and yet our will does not follow through. It doesn't bring what we think right into practice. Why? This is where this entirely human dimension comes into play. It's deeply personal, even exclusively human. And it's the ability to reflect on what is truly important to us, what the thoughts of the heart are, what we truly feel and think in our hearts. And often, our actions are the result of this kind of unconscious reflection, so to speak.
In Freiburg, we visit the guest house of the Benedictine monastery of St. Lioba, where Edith Stein stayed several times, dedicating herself to preparing her lectures, letters, and meditations.
You are standing in what was once the kindergarten and guest house of the Lioba convent. Edith Stein knew two sisters from our convent, Sister Placida and Sister Eva Leutrat. They had known each other since their youth. Both were Jewish, attended school together in Breslau.
Which of these objects were here in Edith Stein's time?
She had this small desk, always with a chair. Here was the bed, a closet, and a washbin. She had a cross on her desk.
Dann stand hier das Bett und da war Schrank und Waschbecken.
Edith Stein came here for Easter and Christmas vacations. Edith Stein spent a lot of time guiding people individually.
Und da gibt's so manch einen Brief.
There is a letter where Edith Stein states very clearly, "You must follow your own path, not mine. You must seek God and find the path He has prepared for you, not the one I am taking."
Not far from here is the cemetery where the father of phenomenology and her former mentor, Edmund Husserl, is buried. At a certain point, she distanced herself from him, forging her own path.
Her break with Husserl occurs at a time when he was writing the second volume of Ideas, shifting from realism to transcendental idealism. At this point, Edith Stein was about to enter the Carmelite order, and she realized that her teacher was heading down a path that is not her own. She had discovered Thomas Aquinas. She had discovered Cardinal Newman, both of whom she had translated. Their ideas showed her new perspectives, which are plausible and also have consistency. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy led her, though she still questioned it, to embrace realism, that things are, that they exist, and that they have an essence, something that characterizes them. Newman's thoughts, in his famous grammar of assent, explains that faith has a foundation just as powerful as reason. That faith can be thought through. That faith is not merely a feeling, but something that can be believed. Something that can even be argued.
We stepped into the cathedral for a few minutes. And as we stood there in silence, a woman entered with her shopping basket. She knelt in a pew and stayed there just long enough to say a brief prayer. That was something entirely new to me. In synagogues and Protestant churches I had visited, people only attended the liturgical acts of the community. But here, someone could step into an empty church during the working hours of an ordinary weekday just to have an intimate conversation, like speaking in confidence. I have never forgotten that moment.
Another event that deeply impacted her, serving as a prelude to her conversion, happened during a visit to the widow of her friend Adolf Reineck, who had converted to Christianity. She was struck by how, despite the profound grief of losing her husband on the battlefield, the woman radiated an admirable peace and strength.
This was my first encounter with the cross. My first experience of the divine power that flows from the cross and is imparted to those who embrace it. For the first time, I was granted the clarity to behold the church that emerges from Christ's passion and his victory over the sting of death. At that moment, my disbelief crumbled, my Judaism faded, and Christ stood radiant before me. Christ and the mystery of the cross.
Edith Stein's conversion to Catholicism was a process shaped by various pivotal events. In the summer of 1921, while vacationing at a friend's country house, she searched for something to read and picked up the first book she found in the library. It was the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila. She was completely absorbed, and by dawn, after finishing it, she said, "This is the truth."
Discovering that a woman with little formal education, but with deep spiritual insight, had found the essence of the truth. What is the truth? It is Jesus Christ. Edith Stein took the concept of the truth very literally in the Greek sense. The Greek word for truth is aletheia, which means that which is unveiled. So discovering the truth means lifting the veil. Her search for the truth led her to remove the veils clouding her vision and her prejudices. And ultimately, she found in Jesus Christ a truth that touched her. A truth that left her wondering, could this really be? That was the moment she took the leap of faith.
The thing is, in her search to understand the human being, she ended up encountering God. And being true to that search, she didn't avoid it, right? She could have said, I've come across this phenomenon, or maybe this phenomenon has found me, and she chose to open herself to it, despite everything that would mean for her life. Think about it. By choosing Christianity, she had to break with a generation of Jewish family tradition, severing an incredibly deep bond with her mother. And the things that she studied them because they mattered to her personally. She wasn't just an academic sitting behind a desk. She wasn't a philosopher who concerned herself with topics unrelated to her life. The things she studied were topics that moved her deeply, and everything she discovered through her studies had profound life consequences. So there were not ideas that began in a book or ended in a book, but rather things that began in life and ended in life.
We continue tracing the life of this philosopher turned Catholic and arrive at the Spire Cathedral, where she received the sacrament of confirmation. Then we visit the Dominican school of Saint Magdalene, where for over 5 years she taught German and history, while also preparing lectures that promoted the dignity of women. From Spire, she gained recognition for her conferences on the role of women in society, offering ideas that were groundbreaking for her time. Through her words, she posed 2 essential questions. What is a woman, and what should she be? Her intellect and talent as a speaker placed her in the spotlight. She held conferences across Germany and in other countries, such as Switzerland, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. She became the voice of Catholic women who promoted the recognition of women's dignity and rights, and who advocated for acknowledging the contribution of women to society beyond the home and childcare.
I admire her for the fact that she was a scholar, a woman with a great passion for truth, who carved out a space for herself in the philosophical world of her time. She was the first woman with a doctorate in philosophy in Germany. Even though she was denied a university teaching position, first for being a woman, then for being Jewish, she kept pushing forward, sharing her ideas through lectures. She was deeply engaged with the issues of her time, the role of woman, the challenges of education, and the dignity of human beings in a society that was beginning to undermine it, particularly with the rise of Nazism in Germany. For me, what's the most valuable about Edith Stein, both as a woman and as a philosopher, is her courage to pave the way for women in philosophy. And I believe that even today, she keeps that path open for us. It's like where Edith Stein walked, we can walk too. She left us a model, a role model, an open road to follow, like a friend guiding the way.
A woman's orientation is towards the personal, towards life, towards wholeness. To guard, protect, preserve, nurture, nourish, foster, and help things grow. This is her natural and profoundly maternal calling. She cares about the material world insofar as it serves living beings. A woman's strength lies in the life of her emotions. Through her feelings, she comes to know what is real and how it is, and through them, she perceives her relationship to others.
She does have a voice on the subject of women. So from a broader perspective, we could say she was a feminist in the sense that she sought to place the reflection on women in a particular light. So from a general perspective, we could say yes, because she aimed to establish or bring into discussion the role of women in society. Now, whether that is the same as the feminist position we might consider most common today, there's a clear distinction. She offers a deep reflection on women and their place in society. For her, the uniqueness of women holds immense value. She does not present women in opposition to men, as if demanding a specific position, but rather highlights the richness of their unique qualities, their vocation as women, and all that their distinct value can contribute to society.
She made her mark in the difficult field of philosophy. For the first time in my life, I studied philosophy as a career. I discovered Edith Stein, a woman who thinks. Until then, it had all been men, Plato and so on, right? So I came across a woman who thinks. What's the difference? She managed to delve into interiority. She said, we are spirit. We have a profound inner life, but one that is relational, connected to men, empathy. Her first major work was on empathy, right? The ability to step into another's world without losing oneself, without being absorbed. She is also highly pedagogical, right? Even in her way of philosophizing, she summarizes, she moves forward, she affirms that reality exists, and that this reality ultimately transcends towards a final origin, which is God. Not a single one, but a triune, one, three in relationship with one another. This is her greatest contribution, her triune vision. It's difficult to put into words, but it's extremely wonderful that human beings by nature are drawn to relationship, and not just to mere equality, but to diversity within communion. And that's the deepest kind of communion, right? In my opinion.
Edith Stein did not only defend women's rights, she also spoke out against the injustices being committed against the Jewish people as Nazism took hold in Germany. She even wrote to Pope Pius XI, warning him of the dangers ahead for Jews, for Germany, and for the Catholic Church herself. Determined to enter the Carmelite order, just days before joining the Discalced Carmelite monastery in Cologne, she went to say goodbye to her mother in Breslau. Her mother had opposed her decision not only to become Catholic, but later to take the Carmelite habit, creating a painful rift between mother and daughter. Before leaving, she accompanied her mother to the synagogue, as that day marked the Jewish festival of Tabernacles.
My mother asked if we could walk home. It was about a 45-minute walk, and she was 84 years old. I had to say yes because I realized she wanted to talk to me in private without anyone interrupting. The sermon was beautiful, wasn't it? She asked. Yes, I replied. You can live a devout life as a Jew, she told me. Of course. If you've never known anything else, I answered. Then in despair, she asked, why have you met Jesus? I don't want to say anything against him. Maybe he was a good man. But why did he claim to be a God? That night, my mother and I were alone in the room. She buried her face in her hands and began to weep. I stepped behind her chair and held her head close against my chest. Until she told me she wanted to go to bed. I went up to her room with her and helped her undress, for the first time in her life. Then I sat on her bed until she told me to go get rest. But I doubt neither of us slept a wink that night.
the city of Cologne on the banks of the Rhine River, where 42-year-old Edith Stein embraced a life of cloistered devotion, entering the Discalced Carmelite monastery. This great philosopher and seeker of truth was driven by a single strong desire: to empty herself completely and be filled with God. Cologne, with just over 1 million inhabitants, is the 4th largest city in Germany. It is best known for its towering Gothic cathedral, which, according to tradition, houses the relics of the 3 wise men. Standing 515 feet tall, with construction dating back to the 13th century, it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996. We visited the crypt, where we find a plaque bearing the names of all the saints and the blesseds who have visited it.
Among them is Edith Stein. Edith Stein died in 1942. Also listed is Pope John Paul II, who passed in 2005.
And what do these symbols mean?
These symbols, this is the symbol of Christ. These are the 2 first letters in Greek of the name Christ. Here we see the Cologne Cathedral with 3 crowns, representing the relics of the 3 wise men. And below, 2 fish. Fish are a symbol of Christians. It was the hidden sign, let's say, that Christians used to identify themselves during the Roman persecutions. At the same time, fish recall one of Jesus' great miracles related to the Eucharist. This is the sign of the Eucharist, the cross, the Eucharist.
Cologne is home to the most comprehensive archive on Edith Stein's life and work, where all her writings have been translated into multiple languages. It is a research hub for philosophers, theologians, psychologists, and educators who seek to study and explore her thought in depth. Here we find her philosophical, anthropological, pedagogical, and spiritual writings.
The most important part of the archive, the heart of it, so to speak, is a special room housing Edith Stein's manuscripts. It contains 25,000 pages of her handwritten work. Here, we also keep her personal documents, such as her doctoral certificate, her baptismal certificate, and a vast collection of photographs.
Where do most of the researchers who are interested in Edith Stein come from?
That's a very interesting question. Because most of our researchers are from Latin America, especially from countries like Mexico, Chile, and Brazil. Some also come to research here from Poland or Italy, but the majority of researchers are from Latin America.
Which aspects of her thought interest them the most?
Most are interested in delving deeper into her philosophical and anthropological thought, especially the young researchers who come here to find her work incredibly universal, yet also deeply relevant to today. They believe that studying her ideas helps them to build arguments and take positions on highly important and major contemporary issues, such as those related to nature, the human being, or genetic modification.
Monica believes that Edith Stein's work not only contributes to modern discussions, it also opens new pathways in the philosophy of religion.
I see Edith Stein as a teacher of religious life, but also as a teacher who shows us a path for how philosophy and theology can work together. That's one of today's great challenges. Many believe that philosophers shouldn't be religious because theology and philosophy are seen as entirely separate disciplines. But Edith Stein proves that both disciplines can work together, thereby opening philosophy to the field of theology, and at the same time to be very rigorous. She argues that philosophers must first work within their own discipline, applying their methods and using their language until they reach the point where reason can take them no further. Only then can philosophers turn to theology. This approach allows us to conclude that theology is a contribution as a source of knowledge distinct from philosophy, and that it can be turned to in certain moments, in exceptional cases. This is a path that Edith Stein opens for us in the practice of philosophy of religion today.
Next to the archive stands the Discalced Carmelite Monastery of Our Lady of Peace, where Sister Mirjam tells us that when Edith Stein entered the Carmelite order, no one knew who she was or that she had been a renowned philosopher.
I can only share what has been passed down by tradition, what was said about her. She was a person who did not draw attention. And since sisters entering the convent were not allowed to speak about their past lives, she was simply postulant Edith, then Sister Benedicta, and nothing more. What did stand out, though, was her ability to handle administrative tasks. At the time, most of the women joining the convent were rather practical, good at housework. And in that area, Edith wasn't particularly skilled. When I entered the convent, I was surprised that no one spoke of Edith Stein. It was only when the process of her beatification began that people started talking about her. That's when everything changed.
There is a state of stillness in God, a letting go of all intellectual activity, where no plans are made, no decisions are taken, and no action is carried out. Everything that is to come is placed in the hands of God's divine will, surrendered to His providence. I came to this understanding only after an experience that overwhelmed my strength, drained all of my vital energy, and left me unable to act. Stillness in God is something completely new and unique for me. The force of life fades, and in its place appears a feeling of being hidden, freed from all problems, worries, or obligations.
We are now heading to the Lindenthal district on the outskirts of Cologne, where the old Carmelite convent once stood and where Edith Stein lived from October 1933 to December 1938.
This plaque reads, "Remember, do not forget. In memory of Edith Stein, Jew, philosopher, educator, Carmelite, martyr, murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau on August 9th, 1942.
I see some symbols here as well. What do
Yes.
they represent?
The first one represents the seven-branched Jewish menorah, the one that once stood in the Temple of Jerusalem. It was taken when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. They took the menorah to Rome. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem. On the Arch of Titus Located where the remnants of Rome are, you can still see a carving where Jewish slaves are depicted carrying the menorah to Rome. It's
I
a
see.
symbol of the Jewish people.
Perfect.
And on the right, we have a symbol of Edith Stein's Christian faith. It's the cross, the water, symbolizing baptism, or perhaps the fire of martyrdom, and the cross, wrapped in barbed wire, represents the concentration camp.
So, in a way, do these two symbols reflect the unity of the Jewish and Christian faiths?
That's right. Edith Stein was Jewish by birth and later converted to Christianity. When she was 14, she stopped praying, saying, "I cannot pray unless I am convinced that God exists." But she was searching for truth, and she found it in Jesus Christ. Later, she would say, "When I was baptized and became a Christian, that was the moment I became truly Jewish." For her, Christianity was the culmination of Judaism. She did not see them as a dichotomy, a separation, or opposites, but rather as complementary.
In 1938, as Jewish persecution intensified, Edith was sent to a monastery in the Netherlands for her protection. In September 1940, the prioress of the Carmelite convent in Echt asked her to write a work about the great Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross for the 4th centenary of his birth. This is where she wrote The Science of the Cross, a work that would become her spiritual testament.
Most did not understand, but those who did knew they must freely take up the burden of the cross for others. I wanted to be one of them. The Lord only needed to show me how. At the end of the celebration, I felt an inner certainty that my prayer had been heard. But where and when I would bear the cross, that I did not yet know.
Edith Stein died in the gas chamber on August 9, 1942, at the age of 51, in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, embracing the children who had lost their mothers. There is no grave, no church to pilgrimage to. And yet, Edith Stein, or Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, lives on through her luminous, extraordinary thought, shining like a beacon in eternity.